Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Dent Ment Podcast. We've got Dr. Milad Owji and our legend, Diwakar Sinha. He's a guest that is coming also from the healthcare space, the medical space. He's a I don't know if we want to call him a finance bro.
I see a lot of people invest into setting up a regulatory compliant DSO. I don't know if I see a lot of people use the investment to the full ability, and we can, I think that those investments can go in from $20,000 to $50,000 into setting it up. But there's a lot of accounting aspects of it to use it effectively, correctly. And then if you set it up correctly, the question is, why are you investing into that setup? And what is your 3 to 5 year plan if you're going to invest into that kind of a regulatory environment? I understand that because most lending institutions are looking for 75 to 80% replacement cost. If not, they're doing stress testing for that. And they're going to do what is called gap financing underwriting on it. I've done over 1,000 de novos, right? So I'm probably a little biased towards de novos.
Sure, that makes sense.
Statistically, they perform very close in the credit side. And they're so overall in they're less than 50 basis points defaults collectively. One would argue they both perform very close.
The one thing I wanted to ask you is why do you think I have a few friends that they went to the Novo route and then they started doing acquisition and they wanted to scale up and they wanted to kind of grow, but then they end up just kind of slowing down. Why do you think what's the trap that caused them to do that when they want to grow and they want to scale their business? I think there's certain traps, or they try to turn around and do it too quickly. Why do you think some people fail in their growing a skill? Or are they trying to grow too fast? Are they just not financially where they need to be for them to grow?
And we have to have a plan for growing the business and having excess cash, which means we're building equity, we're building profitability. And building equity, meaning if we're acquiring a business or if we're doing a de novo, and we're investing $500,000 in debt to build a de novo, the question is, on that $500,000, we have to create $200,000 in EBITDA within 24 months on that location. Because at just 5x, forget about 7x or 10x or any of these DSO conferences you might be going to. At 5x, on that $200,000, now we have $1 million in value on it. We have $500,000 in debt outstanding on it. Let's forget about amortization, paying down that debt, or any of those things. $500,000 in $1 million in value, 25% it goes to pay down taxes on it. $500,000 in debt. We've created $250,000 in net equity and value available on that.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Dent Ment Podcast. We've got Dr. Milad Owji and our legend, Diwakar Sinha. He's a guest that is coming also from the healthcare space, the medical space. He's a I don't know if we want to call him a finance bro. I don't know if that's an appropriate to say like that, but that's probably more true than not. He's had experience working on the credit side and seeing both debt side funding, equity, etc. Had probably more of an impact on different businesses and maybe even organizations that impact your life than you could ever know through helping them sustain, grow, scale, etc. And we're really excited to have him here with us and getting to talk about everything that's going on in dental.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So do you consider yourself a finance bro? I mean, is that technically correct?
Yeah, I guess I'm a banker. Yeah, banker by heart for about 25, 27 years. Yeah. Yeah, started in the, I guess technically before Y2K.
Oh.
I guess if you can say that, before Y2K.
Did you worry about computers crashing in the banking? Was that a thing? Was that a concern?
I don't think I was mature enough to say that. I was, if I can say that, I don't think I was mature enough to say that.
Oh, man. Well, one of the things that we want to do and make sure I think we have take some time through is kind of like what your journey's been. And I think everyone in the industry always likes to know what's going on behind the scenes, and something that you can help people by. Anytime you get to work with someone that's a technical expert, let's peer behind the veil of how things work. That's a black box, right? Technical space, it's a black box for everyone outside of it. I think finance is very similar. So unless people have been in the PE world, the VC world, the finance and the institutional side, they don't really know how it works. So I want to make sure that we take at least a couple minutes to help people get and understand, okay, if you want to take your practice and scale it, or your DSO, or whatever that looks like, what are the mechanics of what banks, PE, and did you explain this to me last time too, which I would like for you to explain. I'm kind of setting all this up. What did you call them? Foundations, or the home? What are they? They're like household lending, at family lending?
Yeah, like credit facilities, if they're looking to scale their business, things like that. Yeah, we can kind of walk into that as far as for group practices, for DSOs, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you start with what your journey has been in the medical and dental space?
Yeah, so I started in the credit space. I started in consumer lending, in the late 90s.
You're going to have to define these things, by the way, because I don't know if you've met dentists before, but you're going to have to explain.
Yeah. So yeah. So I started in consumer lending. Consumer lending is like credit card financing, personal loans. When you go walk into a traditional branch and you say, "Hey, I want a personal loan or a credit card." I was technically your banker. Could be one of those guys, and started my career there for a bank called National City Bank out of Columbus, Ohio, and which is now backed by PNC Bank or acquired by PNC Bank, and did a small stint there, and eventually got into the private practice finance space, and enjoyed doing startup financing for private practice dentists, acquisition financing, and really built my career in that side of the space, working with a lot of private practice dentists. Called on residency programs all over the Northeast. That's really where I focused a lot of my career on, like NYU, Temple University. If you look at residency programs like Stony Brook, in the Brooklyn Mammoth residency programs, all the way up to Tufts University, that was my focus, building private practice dentistry. And then eventually got into the group practice space, into the DSO, MSO side of it, and ran a healthcare group for a bank out on the West Coast. And there I started to expand my horizon, where I started providing credit facilities to larger groups, not just the DSO side, but started to expand it towards the MSO side. So DSO stands for Dental Support Organization. MSO starts for Medical Support Organization. You're starting to hear words such as OSO, Orthodontic Support Organization. You're going to see different lingos out there as you go to different group practice conferences. But really, when you hear the word DSO, it's really, I think people use that term very loosely in the market out there. I call it group practices. I think that's the term I use. Unless you have a regulatory compliant organization set up, really it's a group practice. And that's, from my lens, like
definition. Like, do you actually see the organization change a lot when they do enter into the regulatory space with that? Or
I see a lot of people set up, let me answer that in two aspects, if you don't mind. I see a lot of people invest into setting up a regulatory compliant DSO. I don't know if I see a lot of people use the investment to the full ability, and we can, I think that those investments can go anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 into setting it up. But there's a lot of accounting aspects of it to use it effectively, correctly. And then if you set it up correctly, the question is, why are you investing into that setup? And what is your 3 to 5 year plan if you're going to invest into that kind of a regulatory environment into that? And there needs to be a growth trajectory into that. So I always say the word group practice, because for my definition, a group practice is somebody that's setting up 3 locations, 5 locations, 50 locations. Depending on your plan, you may or may not want to set up a regulatory compliant DSO structure. And unless you're looking for some kind of a lending facility in which you may require a DSO structure or an MSO structure. And we can kind of go to those questions of why would you want to set up a DSO structure, an MSO structure. Some lending requirements are there that might require it. You may be looking to bring in a non-doctor partner into your organization that might require a DSO or MSO, like executive comps. If you're looking to bring on a CFO, CEO, that is a non-doctor, that will require it. So many different reasons around it to build that. So yeah, that was my journey. Ended up providing credit facilities to those institutions, anywhere from 5 million to 100 million. Ended up providing some credit facilities to really big non-equity backed DSOs and MSOs that are out there, institutional credit. And then from there, got into the transactional services and a debt advisory space, which is where I am today, helping DSOs and MSOs scale and provide that life cycle process out there. And then we also do a little bit of clinical coaching. We have a doctor that does a little bit of leadership development and those kind of things out there.
Now, to also point to our previous conversation, we got to hang out for an hour. Super cool guy. He likes to go on cruises. It's important for everyone to know. If you need debt or to know where to go on a cruise, he's your guy to call. Either way, same outcome, a good time.
That's correct.
So,
full life cycle.
Yeah, full life cycle, right? Need debt, stressed, get debt, right? Go on a cruise,
right.
Feel better. Like that's
right.
The journey. That's the patient.
De-stress. The cruise is de-stress.
Yeah. But you also now, and you also are looking to get more into, for everyone that, because we have all sorts of people that watch this podcast, right? We have maybe 1,000, 1,500 people watching it every month or so, whenever it comes up. A lot of those are probably going to have individual practices. Do you also serve debt on the individual practice side? Maybe more people even would be from a single or 2 or 3 location practices?
So our entry point is really closer to about the $3 million check size. But I will tell you, a lot of people call us that are in the sub 3 million space. And we do talk to a lot of them how to think about structuring those deals, because we do want to provide them guidance on how to think about that. Because even though we don't source that level of capital for them, we do provide a lot of guidance on how to think about that. I mean, those kind of consultations, we're doing that complimentary just so for them to kind of think about it. Because we want to be a resource for people, and we want to serve the market, we want to serve the community, and to allow them to think about it. Because if we can guide those doctors that are your audience members and just the market in general to say, okay, this is your first practice. I did a podcast, roughly about a month ago. We got like 4 or 5 phone calls from them. These are doctors buying their first practice, right? And they just said, okay,
right? That's like really.
I'm sorry. Yeah, and their first practice, and they're just a little anxious. Hey, how should I think about my financing? Here's how you think about it, because when you're buying your first practice, if you structure it correctly, should I do a 10-year structure? Should I do a 15-year structure? How should I think about my loan covenants? Then when you get to the second one, you made the right decisions on your first one. I've done almost 1,000 de novos in my life, when I first started my career, thinking about how do you think about de novo planning, as far as, building out projections, and how do you think about new patient acquisition? How do you get to $40,000 in production your first month? And how do you get to $80,000 to $90,000 in production in month 12? And these are small things that for somebody that's just coming out of a year to 2 years out of residency, you might have worked for a bigger DSO that's corporate backed, or even a big group. If we can provide that guidance to them, just spend 30 minutes on a phone call and provide that level of service, we're happy to do that, even though that's not our core audience. Because if we do that right service for them in 3 years or 5 years, I always believe, if you pass it forward, it comes back to you in the future, right? I'm here to be it for the next 20, 25 years or longer, right? So you pass it forward.
That's early, right? And then the ones that grow, you get to reap.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to help you save breath on 50 future conversations. Give us 2 or 3 big tips on someone who's coming out of dental school. Because that's the mission of DentMent, right? Dr. Milad really saw this gap in education for dentists, which you can talk more to that. I like this from the business side of things, because it makes sense, right? You have people coming out of this hyper technical field, so much school, and then all of a sudden it's like thrust into knowing you need to know how contracts work and businesses and finance and accounting and all these things that you didn't go to school for. And so one of this, and I'm sure transaction side must be one of the scariest pieces of this. And I would say it's for anybody that's first getting into business. What are a couple things, like 2 or 3 pieces of advice for someone exiting dental school, looking to buy their first practice?
Great. Yeah. So I'll provide it from a credit lens. And Dr. Milad, you can talk about from a clinical development side, right? So when I was a credit banker, and we talk about this here and now when we're providing guidance to guys that are looking for acquisition financing on the first side, is when you're looking to buy your first practice, and let's say you have a doctor that's looking to buy a practice from a seller, let's grossing $1.4 million. And I'll look at general dentistry. I'll use that as an example. And on a $1.4 million revenue practice, the hygienist is producing $200,000. And it's a solo doctor practice, and there's no associate there. That would mean that the seller is producing $1.2 million. In that case, the associate buying the practice needs to traditionally produce about 75 to 80% of that. If they're not producing that, they're going to have a tough time getting financing towards it, okay? And they need to understand that, because most lending institutions are looking for 75 to 80% replacement cost. If not, they're doing stress testing for that. And they're going to do what is called gap financing underwriting on it. And not to say that the associate may not get financing for it, but these are things that they're going to think about that. Associates are looking at financing in the market or looking for practices in the market. They need to say, okay, as I'm associating at XYZ, what can I do in the market to improve my clinical skill set, and improve my production? And if I'm an $800,000 producing associate or $900,000 producing associate, I'm really going after a practice that's 50% above my production max for our revenue, right? So I'm $900,000 producing. That's the basic math, right? So if I can just provide that guidance to your audience members, so if I'm a $900,000 producing associate, I can buy a practice grossing $1.2 million to $1.3 million max in revenue, and I'll get easy financing for that, assuming, again, qualifiers, okay, that my student loan debt is not XYZ. Unfortunately, like if you go into University Pacific, and I'm not trying to qualify some of these institutions that might have $800,000, $900,000 student loan debt, you might be an income-based.
Do they really?
Some of them, depending on the specialty programs, you could have undergrad debt. And I'm not trying to, again, single out some of these schools. Again,
No,
I
that's
apologize if
wild.
I am.
That's still wild.
I'm not trying.
Crazy. I
You
thought
know,
it's $500,000 the average. That's what people mostly tell me for.
Yeah, some depends on undergrad, where you went to undergrad, then where you went to dental school. A lot of factors out there. So deferment programs, and you have income-based repayment programs. So again, a lot of factors that go into that, right? And if you have spousal income, all these things impact financing aspects. So I'm trying to answer, Craig, your question really quickly on that.
No, it's really good. I mean, did anyone tell you this stuff when you were like, I'm
Yeah.
like, there's a freaking formula? Like, people should know.
I'm giving you the quick formula,
Yeah,
right? So
he's
if your
giving us
audience
the
members
formula.
can just have this.
Like, it's actually like, here's how much you make. You can only do this much more. That's how you get lending.
Yeah, so when I was in lending, right? So I would get these, I would call these like pre-qual questions, right? So I would talk to a doctor, right? And unfortunately, we have these regulatory issues in lending, right? So I would talk to, let's say, Milad on a pre-qual, right? And because he's a doctor coming out of dental school 3 years out, and he would give me all these questions. I would know within like 4 minutes, like if I could do Milad's loan, okay? Unfortunately, I had to go through the full application of Milad, get all his financial. If I couldn't do his loan, I had to process the full application and then decline it.
Even if you knew. Even
if I couldn't. It's just how the regulatory environments are in lending. Okay. And he would get the decline in like 4 weeks. Okay. And unfortunately that's how it was. Right. So what I'm trying to do is trying to give you the formulaic answer. Okay. And a lot of times bankers try to work through the process to provide the answers to say, here's how you get it done. Right. So again, it's take your doctor production times 1.5, and that's really the purchase price you can kind of get to very comfortably, assuming you have normal debt, which means, about $400,000 to $500,000 student loan debt. Another easy formula to think about as far as leverage ratios is whatever your income is as a doctor. Let's say you're making $300,000 income as a doctor. Don't buy a house more than 2.5 times your income, 3 times your income.
Milad?
It's called a rule of 3. And don't buy a car more than a third of your net income. So if you're making $300,000, don't buy and after taxes you're netting $200,000, don't buy a car more than $60,000. I mean, those are good rule of mathematical logics, right? So we had this rule of 3 in banking, right? And if you just use those rules of economics, and Craig, we've talked about math a lot in our last call. These maths, really connect. And if you look at like mortgage financing, right? I did a small stint in mortgage financing. Now, if you look at debt to income ratios in mortgage financing, 33% is debt to income ratio for mortgage financing, right? So it's just rule of 3 is a really good mathematical formula that tends to like check a lot of boxes out there. So anyway, I'll pause there. That's one. And then on the startup side, that's the other side of it. I don't want to exclude that because some of your audience is going to look at startup financing. And the startup financing, again, they need to produce at least about 800,000 to 900,000. You'll see that as a very good denominator for banks looking for financing out there. That's, again, the associate needs to now make $250,000 to $300,000 in income if they're producing 800,000, 900,000. And then again, they need to have a projection pro forma that's showing, hey, I'm going to at least have $700,000, $800,000 in revenue at the end of year 1, and I can produce $40,000 in revenue in my first month of de novo financing. So these are small things for your audience members to think about when they're looking at de novo, when they're looking at acquisitions.
Let me ask you this too, kind of middle of that. I just got some extra lighting. If I look exciting. This is me in the winter. Anyway, do you see de novos, if someone's starting getting their first practice, do you see them succeed more with de novos or with purchasing a practice that's already existing?
So I did this presentation at the American Academy of Dental Group Practices.
Nice.
And
you're referencing your own presentation right now.
And so I've done over 1,000 de novos, right? So I'm probably a little biased towards de novos.
Sure, that makes sense.
Statistically, they perform very close in the credit side. And they're so overall in they're less than 50 basis points defaults collectively. One would argue they both perform very close. And let me give you the pros of acquisition financing and the cons of acquisition financing that people think about.
Acquisition,
the pros of
practice versus
buying a practice. Traditionally, when you're buying a practice, you're getting cash flow, right? I mean, that's the appeal of acquiring a practice.
And day one, money's coming in the door. Great.
But the theory is you're buying $1 million practice. The other aspects is, what if you're buying a $500,000 revenue practice that has no positive cash flow because you have all these fixed expenses, right? I mean, we're not talking about those aspects of it. But the other challenges that we're not talking about that both of you guys probably see out there, and your audience members probably hear out there, is when you buy a practice, the turnover of staff, the patient attrition, the patient chart issues that are out there. What if you buy a practice, the doctor was going to stick around for a certain amount of time and he or she doesn't stick around, and you don't have, when we think about buying a practice, one of the fundamental things that we always hear about is this transition of quote unquote goodwill. What is the meaning of the transition of goodwill, and do we really get that? So those are the things that are the negative things. I'll kind of put that in quotations out there, that we just need to kind of
more risk toward this side too, because of they're subjective, right? Goodwill is subjective, the nature of like team chemistry, the turnover of patients. And I've worked in a lot of different industries, right? And so we normally say whenever you have a leadership transition, like a macro leadership transition, you should assume a 20 to 25% attrition rate.
Yeah. So, but that said, all those things overall, it performs really well, right? On the de novo side, the challenge with that a lot of people just need to kind of think through is like, okay, I'm not going to have patience day one, right? And I think that's the stressor. People need to have fortitude, right? They need to understand that, hey, I'm going to have to plan for it. I need to have 6 to 9 months before my opening date. If I'm going to open November of 2025, my plan really needs to start April of 2025 for a November of 2025 plan. And here's how I'm going to reverse engineer my plan to get the $40,000 in production month one. And I'm going to have a negative run rate till February of 2026.
Yes.
And I'm okay with that. They have this plan, right? And you see a lot of successful models on de novo out there and get good return on investments within 12 to 24 months out there. Okay, but they have that plan out there to get good return on investment out there. But they have to have fortitude out there. They have to have planning out there, and they can get that return on investment. But that's a different business model. But they get to build their business, their culture, and they're going for culture from day one. And they're okay with that negative cash rate for the first 90 days to 6 months, if that's what it takes to build the culture the way they want to build it. And they like that new feel, that blueprint for success. And you hear that word in de novo planning, that blueprint for success.
Love this. All right, Milad. Dr. Milad. Doctor?
I'm right here. Go ahead.
Yep.
The doctor stuff is fake. Just
get called doctor very often. People are like, that's the guy that freaking drills holes in my face, right?
That's more like it.
I'm like, hello, doctor. How can you help me with it? No one's ever saying that. He's never heard that in his entire life, probably. You have tons of friends that are dentists, and I'm guessing a lot of them have also started practices, purchased practices, etc. What's the word? Have people started de novos and be like, man, this has been great, it's been challenging? Have people talked about the financing side of it being difficult, easier than they thought? Like, what have you heard from the actual doctor's side of the experience?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that, we talked about, and the one thing that I'm interested about the conversation we're having, is that the financing side of it doesn't get talked about enough in our industry. And that has been the biggest thing. Like, we leave dental school and then you get out and then you're like, what? I have to do what? So that's why like this information is so important, because the financing side of it is so complex and so confusing. So yeah, that's like one of the biggest challenges in our industry, is the fact that we can't distinguish the loan part of it. And then they say, oh, we don't care about your student loans. But then, like he said, you try to get the loan. They're like, oh, you have too many student loans, or this doesn't match that. And then it becomes such a complex. And that's why like a lot of my friends now, they're even struggling to try to open their practices, is because of the fact that either like mentioned, like their undergrad was too expensive and their loans are too high, and first year, second year out of dental school, they didn't make enough money. And that becomes one of the biggest challenges. Like, how do you get qualified for those loans? Even though the bank gives you 100% financing, but how do you get qualified for those loans when some of the doctors, some of my friends as an associate in California, man, they're barely making it. Like, they're not making enough money to just pay their bills. So it's hard. It gets difficult.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you see this regionally, Diwakar, that if you're dealing with people from certain states, like, oh yeah, if this is where they live, cost of living, student loans, et cetera, this is gonna be way more challenging?
Yeah, I mean, I think you start to go to areas like California. You start to go to areas like New York, Boston. In California, is probably one of the harder states. You start to go to urban markets, right? I mean, just, high cost of living markets, you start to see a little more challenging. The higher dental school cost loans. I mean, I think the problems start to compound in that market, right? So there you have to produce more in those markets to offset the cost of living. So for example, mathematically, I don't, not to get segued there, but try to answer Milad's question a little bit. And let's say I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. here, again, not to box, because I'm sure people in Charlotte, North Carolina, I don't want to get calls from people in my market because
if they call us, I'm like, no, man, call him back.
yeah,
That's his number.
right. I don't
You
want to
give him a call.
I'm going to get calls from people down the street and be like, Diwakar, what's
Who
going
do you
on,
think
man?
you are?
That's not true.
I make good money.
Yeah.
I have money.
Yeah. We got problems in Charlotte too, Diwakar. You know, what are you saying on this podcast? So, but, like in Charlotte, for example, let's say, $200,000, right, in production, again, same 33%, you could produce 600,000. Cost of living here might be different, right? I mean, you get housing here in Charlotte is meaningfully cheaper, than in Los Angeles, right? So, you don't have to produce, versus in LA, you have to produce $300,000 to get probably a little bit less of a house, right? Still a little bit less of a house in LA, right? And those are the challenges you have to deal with. And then, if you look at dental school, and I'm again not to single out dental schools, but if you look at,
We're just gonna
you have
after these are the ones he does.
I'm gonna get so many messages from deans of dental schools. I should not even mention my company name. Don't even mention my company name. I should. Milad, pick a different company name. Let's promote other companies besides Polaris.
Well,
pick random names.
Mr. Diwakar is the CEO of Polaris Health.
I don't even mention my company name because I don't want to get like deans of dental schools sending me messages.
Well, I want to talk from everybody.
What kind of practices, huh?
Yeah, my name is Sarah. Okay, let's get Sarah some message.
Yeah,
Craig, let's get Sarah messages.
He called it Associate for Life USA Dental School. That's what he called
exactly.
it. That's right.
No, but I mean, it's you look at like some of the different dental schools like in Greenville, or if you start looking versus some of the Western dental schools, the cost is going to be a lot higher. To your point, Milad, I think one of the things that your friends or just doctors that are in the higher urban area, they have to produce $1 million in dentistry in their markets to just get to that point where they can get to that $300,000 in production, $350,000 in production, to get the financing from the banks, because not only do they have the higher student loan debt traditionally, they also have the higher cost of living. And candidly, the banks are saying, okay, I understand you have the student loan debt. I understand you might be renting or you might have a mortgage. In California, you have 40-year mortgages. They have 50-year mortgages in California.
Is it really?
Yeah. You do. So we need to figure that out in those markets, right? So, and those are the kind of things that, to Milad, to answer the question, I have all the formulas that we're able to look on our side and say, okay, based on this income, based on this debt, when we do credit financing for our group practices, we source and we can say, based on this structure, this is the kind of financing this client needs. And even, for any of your audience members, if they call us looking for their first practice, we can tell them, because we're not a bank, we'll tell some of your audience members, okay, you need to wait, don't apply yet. This is what you need to produce. Once you get to this production, then you apply, because there's no reason for your audience members to apply for financing, impact their credit scores. They just need to develop their production, work on, maybe go to, a couple implant courses, go to develop the clinical skill set a little more, wait 6 more months, a year.
Right?
Yeah.
Wanna learn how to do implants? I'm just kidding.
And just come back a year later. Nothing wrong with that, right? Or, and we're looking at an acquisition because de novo may not make sense for them.
That's
So
interesting.
the one thing I wanted to ask you is like, why do you think so I mean, I have a few friends that, they went to the Novo route and then they started doing like acquisition and they wanted to scale up and they wanted to kind of grow, but then they end up just kind of slowing down. Why do you think that, what's the trap that caused them to do that when they want to grow and they want to scale their business? I think there's certain traps, or they want try to like turn around and do it too quickly. Why do you think some people fail in their growing a skill? Or are they trying to grow too fast? Are they just not financially where they need to be for them to grow? Because like I had a friend that had like 5 practices and then he tried to grow it, but he just got trapped where he was like, man, I just don't know what I'm doing. In a sense of like financing side of it, he didn't know what was going on the way he should have. So he's just his growth kind of slowed down, and he had to like start selling some of that practices. What do you think is the cause for the dentist? Like, what are the traps that you see dentists that try to scale too quick? Are they either scaling too quickly or they're just not taking the proper step? What is your recommendation if somebody's trying to grow? Like, when is the right time to go and acquire more practices, or when is the right time to say, hey, I need to like do X, Y, Z to make sure that I'm doing it right if I want to acquire another practice?
And we can even answer this from 1 to 2, 2 to 5, 5 to 10. Maybe you can give it a try.
Yeah, and obviously, I think this is probably something where I can probably maybe tag team with Craig a little bit, just on the operation side, maybe also. But I'll answer on the finance side, and answer some operational issues in there. And then, Craig, if you want to add anything on the operational side as well. So yeah, I think one to two, what a lot of doctors need to kind of start thinking about is, how do you run a business from afar? When you're in the practice, right? I mean, you're living and breathing your team managers. Theoretically, you're doing your daily huddle. I say that all the time. And I'm saying this for your audience members also. So as they're listening, theoretically, you're doing your daily huddle.
Do your daily huddle. That's the point.
Yes.
Do your freaking daily huddle.
Yeah.
Hey, Mr. Dwight, I can tell you right now, there's no daily huddle happening.
Yeah. So at least Craig and I did our daily duty for all your audience members, right?
God's will. That's right.
Yeah. Did God's will, right? So as you get to practice number 2, you have to learn to be a leader from afar. I mean, so you have to be able to check in on your practice manager. You have to theoretically check in on your partner if you have a partner in your practice number 2 or an associate, and say, hey, how are you doing? How is our practice going to be doing this week? Our patients doing this week? And be able to check in on your practice management software if you have a cloud-based one, or be able to remote in if you don't have a cloud-based one through TeamViewer or something like that. And there are still a lot of practices that are not cloud-based, right? It's just what it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Most are getting to cloud-based, but there are some ones that are still not. And as you get to practice number 3, some of them are now getting to a regional manager, and some doctors are now theoretically getting out of the chair down to 2 days a week. Okay. And now trying to be a business owner versus a clinician. Okay. And when they get to 4, they're starting to add, quote unquote, theoretically, a true regional manager. Okay. And they're not able to develop their regional manager to be a true operations person. Okay. Their big black hole, is either practice number 3 or practice number 5. And I think you mentioned Milad, number 5. So one is an operations challenge, get into practice number 5, okay, which is, depending on the geography, not the answer salaries. A regional manager can cost anywhere from $80,000 to $125,000. And I mean, all this data is in Glassdoor or Indeed or any of that stuff. I'll let people, look up that data depending on geography and compensation, things like that. But the other answer is then going to be the credit side of it. So one is the operational side, the ability to lead an organization from afar, transitioning from a clinician to CEO, developing your doctors. This is why we brought on clinical leadership. As you're transitioning from a clinician within the practice, can you lead doctors from producing 600,000, 800,000 to $1.2 million? Because if you can't get your associates to produce more, and and most of our principal doctors are the biggest producers, and our biggest producer just left the chair, then the practice hasn't improved in production.
Correct. And before we hit the clinical, let me touch this piece on the operation, because this is really common. And this is really interesting to me because this is a really common problem in almost any kind of organization that has multiple locations. 5 is like a magic. First is 3. 3 is a problem. 2, you can cheat. 2, you can drive back and forth. So a lot of people, you can just like personality and muscle down 2. 3, all of a sudden your systems start to break, because your accountability systems start to break, your operations systems start to break, your systems architecture for like IT and like how the different tranches work for who can see what and what people have access to, and your accounts payable and accounts receivable. Okay, like now we're getting maybe beyond what a normal person is used to doing on a normal day's work. 5 is where it's really interesting. 5 is where all of your systems have to change almost entirely. Like the way that you even think about systems in business at 5 locations, and this is hopeful that you still have them within 15 to 30 minutes of each other, but everything breaks down at 5 locations. I've seen this in, everything from nonprofits to restaurants. Like it is the same thing, because you have true autonomy where you yourself literally physically could not visit all of them in a given week on average. It's impossible. You will have a problem somewhere. And when that problem happens, you have to figure out, is your organization, is each individual unit in your organization 80% sustainable without you? Like, will it get 80% done without you touching it? Because something will go wrong and something will break in one of them, and you will have to disappear into a black hole to solve these problems. And you will find out if your organization has enough infrastructure to prop itself up without your leadership and guidance. And I think at 5, a lot of people that don't have any leadership or management development or haven't developed themselves in those ways, if they're not ready to do that, it's going to just constantly feel like a weight bearing down on them, because problems will come up somewhere and you will not have time to touch the rest in a consistent fashion. And that crushes leaders. So money, I don't know how that works.
Yeah. So, in fact, it's to Craig's point, 5, and the next one's really around the same challenges. Craig's about 7 to 10 is the next one, is a black hole. So 5, you see these stopping points, 5, and then the next one's 7 to 10. So on the other bigger challenge along with that, human capital, and then finance capital, right? So, I mean, I said earlier, our entry point is usually around $3 million in capital. $3 million in capital also ends up being around practice number 5. Okay. Below that, I mean, it's really all your regular banks. I mean, can we go below 3 million? We can. So we do have some people that come in around 2.5, and say, hey, you know, I'm ready for that capital position. And we do talk to people about
US Bank and some of just the institutions.
I mean, yeah, they'll 2.5. So that's when I said, you know, some people call us early and say, hey, I'm not at the 3 million. Will you help me? Sure, we will. Early stage planning will help them out. But really $3 million and above is really where we start to play really well in the space. You know, recapitalize, help them get a credit facility, help them think out 3 to 5 years out in that process, help them think through financial reporting, forecasting, how to think about the equity they're creating in the business, how they're thinking about staffing within the business. I mean, people need to think about, you know, one of the things is, okay, if you're getting to practice number 5, you know, we just talked about, are you putting a regional manager in? Have you thought that it's going to cost you an extra $100,000 in your geography, or a director of operations? And then if you're getting to a $3 to $5 million position, you're going to be going from cash basis financials to accrual basis financials. And if you go to accrual basis financials, it's going to cost you an extra $30,000 in financial reporting per year. Have you thought through that? So not only did you just add a regional manager cost of $100,000, you're adding an additional $30,000 in financial reporting costs per year. So are you okay with the $130,000 expense per year? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's because the majority of people may not be, because now we need to create a plan of what you're going to be doing after that to offset that cost. Okay, which is, what does your growth strategy look like?
Yeah. Growth is nonlinear. It's not like this. Like, as you add locations or regions or whatever, you have to like compensate on infrastructure to then allow yourself to have the infrastructure to get the profit, and hence the financing piece. But if you don't plan it out, you will burn through cash and you'll end up in a negative cash flow situation as you grow really fast.
And I think that's really the thing that a lot of groups don't think about is, and you know, once they get to about 8 or 9 and they start getting cash reserves within the business, then they start to get into a very comfortable position. But also they have to make sure that they're not living on their cash, right? So one of the other things we talk about is, how are you putting cash reserves as cash and balance, right? So we, again, rule of 3. So we take the excess cash they have and we say, take a third of it, you put it cash on balance. Okay, so because as you go from a business grossing $10 million in revenue to $20 million in revenue, your cash and reserve needs to continuously increase, right? Because you can't have the same cash and reserves, right? So that we need to have more cash and reserves. The next third needs to go towards you enjoying life, okay? Because we are a culture of immediate gratification. So if you didn't enjoy more vacations or cruises in my world, you know, then you wouldn't enjoy the hard work you're doing. And the other third has to go towards taxes. So those are the 3 things we need to be doing with the excess cash we're building within the business. And we have to have a plan for growing the business and having excess cash, which means we're building equity, we're building profitability. And building equity, meaning if we're acquiring a business or if we're doing a de novo, you know, and we're investing $500,000 in debt to build a de novo, the question is, on that $500,000, we have to create $200,000 in EBITDA within 24 months on that location. Because at just 5x, forget about 7x or 10x or any of these DSO conferences you might be going to. At 5x, you know, on that $200,000, you know, now we have $1 million in value on it. We have $500,000 in debt outstanding. Let's forget about amortization, paying down that debt, or any of those things. $500,000 in $1 million in value, 25% it goes to pay down taxes on it, $500,000 in debt. We've created $250,000 in net equity and value available on that. Great. Now we can show the bank we have some equity is left on it. Now we can go out and leverage towards the next practice. So we're trying to show this level of responsibility every time we go out. And this is just de novo. This is not even acquisition. So this is responsible lending.
What's irresponsible lending? I'm just kidding.
Not creating that equity and asking for more money, but they're able to recapitalize still.
That's right. That's right.
They're able to recapitalize. So.
And do you see any changes coming down the pipe? Once we have about, I don't know, with 10-ish minutes, Milad, is that probably right? Dr. Milad, do you see any big changes coming down the pipe from the financing side of things on how it's impacting the dental medical space? I know there's obviously changing on the interest rates just based on the Fed. What other kinds of things have an impact on the cost of money, price to acquire? Do DSO roll-ups have anything to do with this? Is medical coming in and considering buying in at some point, starting to acquire? Like, where's the future here?
Yeah, so I'll kind of speak. I mean, I work in the group practice space. Okay. I also say I'm an eternal optimist. And we talked a little bit about it last time. So there's communication in the market out there that the DSOs, it's consolidating. Okay. And I will say there's data out there, research data out there that says the market's going to consolidate to about 55, 60% in about 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah. And I've also sat down with a lot of law firms out there that do a lot of private practice setups, okay, that compete with that data, okay? Because I just look at, I'm a trajectory guy, and I look at that and say, well, if that's based on just the startups happening, and I would say if this one law firm is doing 120 startups, and I would say, well, they wouldn't have 5% market share because they're just one law firm, okay? Then that would mean that at least 2,500 to 3,000 startups are happening. They're one law firm. So that would imply to me there's a lot of startups happening in the market. Okay, so I look at it and say there's a lot of competing information happening in the market out there. So I think the market is out there where I think private practice is going to continue to be a good force in the space. I think there's going to be a bigger presence of emerging groups. Okay, 3 to 10 is going to continue to expand. I think that's going to be the buffer zone.
So like a dentist themselves, not PE backed, probably. Right?
Not PE.
Maybe institutional lending backed, and getting to where they're good leaders, they're good business owners, and they're growing to 5 to 10, 3 to 10 locations.
That's correct. I think that's going to be a huge movement over the next 5 to 7 years. I do think the DSO space is there, and I think it's going to be there. And I think it's going to continue to expand in the space. I don't think anything's going to change that space, and I think it's going to continue to expand. From 24 to 25, first gone down, right? So SOFR stands for Secured Overnight Finance Rate. That's gone down. The Treasury Index has gone down. The bank markets, the capital markets have opened up. Credit lendings have opened up. I think there's every indication that by the end of the year, prime's going to go down another 50 basis points. It's not going to go down now with the tariff issues and all these issues, too politically driven right now. By the end of the year, it's going to go down. That's going to open up, more acquisitions, more capital markets. I see, a meaningful improvement in lending over the next 24, 36 months. So I see a forward movement in that direction. I'm optimist that, financing is going to improve. Yeah. But I see overall, as far as, capital markets, just 25 in itself versus 24 with SOFR improving and all these things, I see meaningful improvement changes in 25. And I do see with where the changes with how the Federal Reserve is done. Let's forget about political dynamics. The Federal Reserve has done an amazing job managing inflation and all these things coming out of it the last 3 years, and I think it's headed in the right direction out of it. So I'm very optimistic of where it's headed over the next 12 months out there. So I just giving a Federal Reserve, let's forget about any political aspects of it. I think the Federal Reserve has done a good job.
Love this.
I don't think Trump would agree with that.
Finance bros, man, they got to stick together. Come on, man. But in the last statement, we're super thankful you're on here. With all this data, with all this information that you actually get to see, you're behind the scenes, you understand, what would you tell dentists in layman's terms that are thinking about buying a practice, doing de novos? Like, what message would you give them, right? Looks, things are looking good. Like, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think as you're looking to buy a practice, look at the demographics 5 years out. So one of the things that, when you look at demographics data, some of the data out there says, look at patients with demographics data of 1,200 patients per dentist. I don't follow that data. I want my dentist to be in demand. So I recommend to our clients that the patients to dentist ratio needs to be 2,500 to 1. I want it to be more in demand because I don't know of, I want to think out more competition coming into my client's market, right? So I see contraction happening in my client's market, right? So if I go into an area where 1,200 patients to dentist ratio is already the market right now, what if more dentists move into that market, right? That number is going to potentially shrink. Now you could argue, what about patient population expansion? But I don't want to look at those factors moving forward. I just want to look at the data right now and I say, okay, I want it to be 2,500 to 1 the moment I make that execution. Because leases, people, even though leases are leases, you're not buying a building. If you just look at $5,000 a month as a lease, that's $60,000 a year with a CAGR of a 3% lease. At minimum, it's $600,000 without the CAGR increases of leases. So that's no different than buying a building, right? Because you're committed to that lease, right? And most leases don't let you terminate early, right? I don't think people look at leases that way, plus the cost of a practice. So I look at those investments as a fully committed investment. So look at that and say, okay, when I buy a practice, when I'm doing a de novo, right? I'm here for the next 10 years. Get your renewal options for another 5 years or 10 years after that. If you're doing a de novo acquisition, theoretically, you want to be this for the next 20 years, right? And look at it and say, I want to be the doctor in demand, because your team is not going to execute the way you want to, right? There's no perfect team. None of us are perfect. So don't look at the perfect ratio of 1,200 patients to dentist. Be at the 2,500 patients to dentist, because your team's not going to execute well. You're not going to execute well. None of us are perfect.
Really good. Super clear. I love that you give super specific formulas, numbers. It's not like, it's a good thing to get financing and de novos can be great. Like, I love that you give such specific, here is literally how to be successful doing this. And I hope everyone that has tuned in and will tune in, right, to this podcast be able to take notes and be able to utilize this for themselves and their future and their friends. And that's what we're all about here at DentMent, making the lives of doctors better and equipping you with the tools that you need to be successful. So, Diwakar, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Dr. Milad. And we'll see you guys all.
As always, when the guest comes on Dent Ment Podcast, I truly appreciate your time. Sorry for all the craziness and the mess you've been dealing with, but hey, man, I truly appreciate the time. It's a lot of valuable information that dental schools don't teach. Certainly, when I left dental school, I think that's the whole idea of DentMent. What it became about is just trying to really teach the dentists and letting them know that, hey, things are possible if we're educated about these kind of things. And I think these are the type of conversation that's going to empower the next generation of the dentists, because these are the type of thing that they didn't teach me in dental school. I have no idea what any of it means or any of it would do, but this is the kind of conversation that's going to help our next generation of dentists. So I'm truly grateful for this conversation. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, guys. And by the way, I'm a fan of all the dental schools.
Besides NYU.
Yeah, I love this. Next time I went to one of them, I'm like, man, I got a friend who says you're way too much debt.
Imagine you getting a call from NYU tomorrow morning. I wouldn't be surprised, though. I tell you, based on experience, we said something on one podcast. I got about 7 calls. They're like, you got to stop. We're like, okay. But hey, man, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
See you guys.
Right.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.